request, start and end of the request. That's cool, but we weren't really relying on that because we need something like a conversation. Problem is, of course, your entire application is not designed to run the conversation because when will it end? This is a conversation for us, the bottom one, where the guy changes the event name, but the top one as well. So we don't have these really dialogue screens where we could delimit the beginning and the end of a conversation. Customer wants a desktop-like application in a website. So, as I told you, loading and refreshing loaded objects takes a long time in goods. That was a problem. But the refresh of the database objects, that was happening actually automatically. So we didn't have to take care of that. And we only did that when the user was able to see the changes on the screen. So when we were refreshing the calendar view, also the objects were refreshed. So we actually, the session data was in sync with the client-side view. So that's cool, and then you're able to do concurrent changes as a transaction conflict. Now this is then more what the Gemstone one likes, if I can visualize it like that. Cool thing is, loading objects are up to date. This is really fast. So we always have up-to-date objects. The refresh is automatic. Your new request comes in, and all the objects actually changed. So requests of different users come in interleaved, but all the objects already changed. So there's no way of using the database mechanism transactions to track concurrent changes. Luckily, we implemented this manual write barrier for goods, and we're actually using that inside of our database access layer to track concurrent changes. So what is the object tracking? We're just using this. Every session keeps this write buffer. We're using the same implementation, and it keeps the write buffer. Whenever the request for that user comes back in, we can take a look in the history, which other objects were changed by other requests, and then see, oh, you're making a change to the same object. This is a transaction conflict. So we turned off the automatic beginning of a request of a transaction. We turned that off, and we have our own transactions in there because, well, a transaction error has to be shown as a separate window on side of the screen. So in that case, we needed to turn this off. If we can turn it back on, I'm willing to discuss. So how does our entire application access the database? Well, using this pattern. This is the only message from the entire application, and it works with all different databases. We'll say, well, session contains a database connection, and then we just pass it a block which has to execute as a transaction. So everything there executed, and at the end you do a commit. We pass on several objects because there's just a little problem. Well, first of all, we never used the for objects parameter until recently. The idea was to do maybe locking or not, so that the for objects internally would be able to lock those objects. We don't do locking, and we just work with the optimistic transaction mechanism. But now the for objects are needed because sometimes when the objects are deleted, you don't see it. Difficult to explain, but we now need to use it. And then you have 3 blocks. On success, just execute this. On failure block is just going to put up the warning screen saying, hey, you changed the name, which another person changed as well. And then we have a retry if. Retry if, well, you can have concurrent changes to the same objects which are completely compatible. So we just put a condition there which verifies. So if you change the name of the object and then somebody else changes the date, that's very compatible. But you will get actually a transaction conflict because you change the same object. So there we just compare, oh, is the name still the same? Okay, so and then we just relaunch the entire transaction inside of our mechanism. So, pretty happy about that. So I think we are actually pretty more cross-database independent. I'm almost, well, why? No, yeah. I'm almost at the end. We also have made some hybrid components, which after the fact, I think it was a not so good choice. So we started, if you think back about the resource search tool, which was able to show you lots of resources. So, and they said, okay, we have to go through 10,000 different resources and so on. That's cool. Problem was, we have to render interactively. User is searching, he wants to immediately see his things. So what we decided is to serialize the entire object database into JSON arrays, JavaScript side, and generate actually the resource finder JavaScript, the client side in JavaScript. So you want better client-side interactivity, and Seaside has some pretty good JavaScript generation. Most of it is, of course, implemented completely in JavaScript separate files, but you need a connection between both. And I just wanted to show that because I think it is a really cool thing of Seaside. It's on the next slide, so I'll just mention the next bullet here. We do have some scalability problems in that case. If you would be using normal Seaside and doing just the normal thing, because every line inside of this, I'll show you, every line, if I open the resources here, every line here, if I unlock, I can do in-place editing. So what you would do in Seaside is you generate your line and you say, well, this has an in-place edit. Very bad. From the moment that you had about 300 lines here, it took a couple of seconds before the interface became usable again, just because it was registering all those editable fields, all those launching all the JavaScript things. And on top of that, we also have the a needed context menu, so there is lots of things going on, and some of these things are also in place editable. If I'm able to launch here, you get the availability timeline of that resource throughout the dates and so on. So we had some scalability problems. First of all, if you have about 10,000 resources, you don't want to create a passenger, Seaside passenger for your 10,000 objects. The callback registry would get huge. I don't know what that would cost us Seaside or whatever the performance would be, but I'm opted out before that. And you have to think about client-side performance as well. So what Seaside has is, the cool thing is that you can register a new, just pass a URL for a callback. It has immediate accesses for that. So for example, you can just, I'm assigning things. These are the patterns I'm doing all the time if I have these hybrid components. Part of the resource finder is implemented in Smalltalk. Most of the interactive functionality is implemented in JavaScript. And then JavaScript has to call back. It has to be able to fetch the availability, asking it back to the Seaside, because I'm not serializing that in the first time. It also has to be able to say, well, you are changing this name and so on. So these are the things. You register an AJAX callback and you assign it to some function, or you are registering a URL for a particular action to a variable, and those are pretty much the only communication you need if you write two parts, JavaScript and Smalltalk. Found that pretty cool because it has just immediately baked into Seaside. So how am I handling these scalability problems? The thing is that you just have to register your in-place editor. When you click on the row, then you register. So you don't do it all the time, you just do one by one. But it means that you have to do client-side programming, JavaScript. And you need callbacks. Okay, we have a lot of tests for our system, mostly unit testing of the model. So we're actually, just for those interested, we are using 3 different frameworks for testing. I hope to merge at least 2 of them. So unit testing your model, basically lots of unit tests verifying the integrity of our entire system. But I'm using Seaside testing. I started porting the latest version of David Schaffer, who is now implementing it in VisualWorks, started porting the new version, started that at Camp Smalltalk last time. It actually works now. So you can actually use the basically entire Seaside testing functionality with Seaside 3. Actually, the previous framework I adapted, well, small adaptations actually, as well to work. The only thing we needed was like callback simulation. All the time, tried to say, okay, you're actually hitting the right button and you are adding a new event. I want to test that. And basically, the only thing that is in our application is a callback. But with Seaside testing, you cannot really do a callback simulation, really do like that. So what do I mean with it? It's basically like this. I write a test, I do some stuff, and then I have a block, say execute this one as a callback. It creates a request context and everything, and it executes this as an AJAX callback. Should actually change the name. So that only parts of the component change. And that way, I was able to test also lots of the behavior. But the problem is, of course, you don't have client-side testing. I had lots of JavaScript behavior, and for that, I really recommend WebTester, which is using Selenium, Selenium remote control, to do client-side testing. So you're able to test your client-side JavaScripts as well. And actually hope to integrate these last 2. Because the new framework of David also uses a connection to the browser to use to do client-side testing. But, well, Selenium has a huge user base. Maybe it's better to integrate with them. So, just a few remarks, because that's really the hot of the piece last of the couple of weeks, is we're porting it to Gemstone. I just wanted to give you, for those who are also undertaking the adventure by moving from Pharo, developing in Pharo and deploying onto Gemstone. Well, there was a difference between the object-oriented transaction model. Really use these grease and lint rules. Slime and the portability things. Really cool. Really use them because you will get stuck if you try to port. Another thing, differences between Pharo and Gemstone we hit a lot was the stricter compiler in Gemstone. We apparently were pretty sloppy creating empty statements and so on. And of course, everything we tried to load in was every time a setback. And before we actually understood what was going on, what were the errors, it took us some time. You can do no shadowing of variables. So Stefan, actually, this is a call that the compiler in Pharo should be more strict. Marcus. So, or we should actually write better code, right? So another thing is that that's something we took a while. If an error gets thrown, we try to put up an automatic connection to a Mantis database and put all the information. We're using exceptions. You had to create exception A. I'd like to talk about that if that's correct. A block closure is an executable block. I don't really remember why we had to address that one, but we needed to. And there is some changes, there is some incompatibilities between the date, duration, and time span protocol, which of course you can imagine we're using a lot, but let's see, it seems we're able to handle this. And the one thing we hit was one particular missing thing in the current version of Gemstone is assignment to temporaries, because if you have two AJAX callbacks. Often the trick is to assign a value to a temporary variable and then use it in another callback. The problem is that doesn't work in Gemstone currently. What you have to do is just put a value holder, put an object, and change the object inside. So don't change the object inside the temporary variable, but change the variable inside that one. So pretty easy to circumvent. Actually, we're trying to create automatic transformation rules in the transformation engine of Lint for those cases. Haven't really succeeded. I wanted to get it, but I was on holidays last week and didn't want to do that. So, but probably it will come. Okay, so that brings me at the end of the talk. I hope I've been able to give you some glimpses of a really new Seaside application, which is very interactive. If you want to see more into depth how this is working, you want to get a more glimpse, please ask me. I can give you a demo offline. Really is no problem. The problem is if I want to demo every little feature, or I'm already out of time right now. So yeah, just this is together with Vooruit. They are the customers, and we are going to launch this system also to other cultural centers. The system is currently moving into a beta phase, so we have implemented all functionality. We are now moving into fixing bugs. Hopefully by October, have a first beta version, and normally by the end of the year should actually become available as a web service to other customers. So if you are an event organizer or you know one, okay. So thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Yes. So the question was, did you try to use Magma with Koch VM? No. So we're actually not using Koch at the moment. Because, okay, we had to use a stable. It's now moving into a stable version. And the Magma interface at the moment is a bit outdated because we moved from Magma to Goods, I think, by the end of last year. We started actually this project 1 year ago, one-man project, and, well, one-man time project. So we will probably try that. But I heard that indeed it should have a better performance in the Koch. But haven't tried it, no. Planning, I don't think it will be a lot of problem to update that specialization or database layer, no. So, yeah, why not? I think it won't take us too much time. At the moment, we're targeting Goods and Gemstone, but actually, there's no problem of just updating our Magma specialization layer. Yes, Georg?
Any time into Seabreeze while you were taking your decisions?
You mean Seabreeze to generate the user interfaces of Seaside? Huh?